What's up, everybody? It's Jesse, and I'm back again for the 24th installment of Social School. I want to thank everybody for showing up and watching this video. Um, Today, we are going to talk about decision making and just some things to think about as you're making choices. You know, every day we make hundreds of choices throughout the course of the day, right? You decide what to eat for breakfast, what clothes to wear, whether or not to go to school, whether or not to go to work. And you make lots of choices all the time. And so this is a skill that hopefully most of us have. I will tell you, your success in life has a lot to depend upon the choices that you make. We all know people that, make good choices and usually good things happen to them. And we all know people who maybe make bad choices and bad things happen to them. So as I get into this video, what I'm going to talk to you about today is kind of more about problem solving, right? So how do we decide on how to handle different and difficult situations that happen in the workplace? And there are lots of things that can happen. So as we've discussed over the last few videos, maybe you're dealing with an angry customer, maybe you're being mistreated by a boss. Maybe, in the case that I'm going to use in this video today, maybe you find out that a coworker has been stealing from you, and you have to decide how to deal with that. And we always have lots of choices. And I'm going to look at, kind of three possibilities of different things, but there's always choices, right? In every situation, in every problem, you have lots and lots of choices. So as we get into this, as we think about, problem solving and making decisions, we just want to, give this some thought, take it seriously, and see if we can't come up with some good ideas of how to solve problems and make better decisions. So where I want to start with this is just talking about a super basic model for thinking through your problems and thinking how to deal with it. The fancy name for the model that I'm about ready to show you is called a cost-benefit analysis. And if you've ever had an economics class or something like that, then maybe you've heard about this before. But basically, what we're talking about is weighing the pros and cons of the possible solutions to your problems. In advanced cases and dealing with serious problems that you have time to really think about, it might be a good idea to even write these pros and cons down on paper. And I'm going to show you a model for dealing with that, and we're going to, sort of run through an example. But as we look at this, we want to think about the pros and cons to all our solutions. In the short term, if somebody is really getting under your skin, if they're really bothering you, you might be tempted to cuss them out. But you have to think about, what are the consequences of that? And so as we get into this and as we look at it, one of the things that we want to think about is, what is it that I'm really trying to do? What is it that I'm trying to achieve? And can I get what I want through my possible solutions? And not every time that you have a problem are you going to be able to think these things through properly, but that's a really good reason why we should have some strategies, some tools in our toolkit that will kind of help us to deal with it when these problems arise. So I want you to think for a minute about the best decision that you ever made in your life. Maybe you were tempted at one point to quit your job, but you stuck with it. Or, for some students, they have been tempted in, these COVID times and dealing with difficult school situations. Some kids are tempted to drop out and they decide to stick with it. Some kids decide to do that, to actually drop out of school, and it turns out okay. But if you think about, the different choices that you've made in your life, and you think about, what were the really good choices that you made, probably those choices were things that you thought through. You really gave it the thought that it deserved. You really gave it the time and attention that it deserved. And so that's why as we go through this, there are plenty of people who, they just make snap decisions. They just decide, right there that this is how it's going to be. And then there are other people who, take their time and really, give it the thought and time and attention that it deserves. And in general, the more you think about, what are the consequences, what's going to happen if I do this, what's going to happen if I do that, the more you think about it and the more you weigh those costs and benefits, those pros and cons, the more you think about a problem, the better it'll be. And maybe, one of the things that we do in decision making is we ask for someone, to help us. Maybe you run your idea by somebody. Well, so, hey boss, I've got this problem. What should I do about it? Or you ask a teacher or a friend. And that's why, the social skill of asking for help comes before this. Sometimes in making really, really tough decisions, we need to ask for help. But again, the best decisions are usually ones that you think about. And I know for me, I've gotten myself in trouble a lot of times where I haven't really thought through what it is that I wanted to do or how I wanted to deal with a problem. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to give you a possible model of how we might be able to do this. And I'm going to show you what it looks like to draw it out on paper. And obviously not in every problem are you going to, take the time to sit down with your pen and your pad and write everything out. But if you do have a really serious problem and you take the time and you do this, it's probably going to help you to make that right decision. All right, so here's what this looks like, and I want to apologize in advance. This was the best I could come up with on Microsoft Word. But there have been times in my life where I've had problems that were so serious that I needed to write them down on paper. And I have identified the problem, I've thought of possible solutions, and then I've weighed the pros and cons. And when I have done this in my life, it has really, really, really helped me in order to solve my problem or come up with a good solution. So what I want to do now is just kind of work you through how this works. And the first thing that I'm going to do is kind of set the table on the problem that we're dealing with. And so I'm going to tell you a real quick story. I want you to imagine for a minute that you are at work and you've been at your job for a long time, a year or more, and you have a pretty good working relationship with your coworkers. And after you've been there a year, a bunch of new people start getting hired on, and every day when you go to work, you take your favorite soda and in the break room you put it in the fridge and you leave that soda that's right there so that you can have your favorite soda when you go to lunch. And so after a bunch, these new people come on, you start noticing that every once in a while your soda is missing, right? So you go to the fridge and there's no soda in the refrigerator, and you're not really sure who it is. You've got maybe some ideas, and then one day you walk into the break room at lunchtime and you see a coworker who is drinking your soda right there in front of you. So the soda that you put in the refrigerator, they're sitting in front of you and they're drinking it. And at this point, you're pretty angry. I would be pretty angry if I knew that one of my coworkers was stealing from me. But this is something that happens, right? This is a problem that you might run into in the workplace. And as we think about, what are possible solutions, for a lot of us, we'd get mad. We'd start cussing that person out. Or I had one student when I told this story who said that they would snatch the soda out of their hand and pour it on somebody's head. There are other people who go in another direction with it. Maybe what they say is, it's just a soda, it's not a big deal, I let them deal with that, right? And so my first response is really aggressive. If I'm going to cuss somebody out or pour a soda on their head, obviously that's pretty aggressive. But if I let somebody steal from me and I don't ever, do it or don't ever address it, don't ever do anything about it, then that kind of creates some problems too. And so maybe a third possible solution is that we try being assertive, based on that video that we just saw. Maybe you do an assertive response, and in an assertive response I say, hey, I feel really upset when you take my soda and don't ask me for it. If you can't buy me a new one, or if you can't replace it, then I'm going to have to talk to somebody, or at least let people know that you're stealing my stuff. So we look at these possible solutions, and I'm going to go real quick. I'm going to go back to our little diagram, and we're going to talk about kind of how we break a problem down and how we look at this and do our pros and cons, our cost-benefit analysis. I'm going to do a cost-benefit analysis on this problem just to kind of show you what it looks like. So the first thing that we have to do is we have to identify, what is the real problem, and that's what's up in the upper left-hand corner, right? Obviously, this is the case of the stolen soda. And I start off with a simple example or a silly example just to kind of run you through this. But the first thing you have to do is identify what really is the problem. And in your case, it might be, you know, an angry customer or a coworker who's always telling you what to do. But you have to, first things first, you have to identify the problem. And then as I go down that first column, then I start looking at possible solutions. You know, in this case, I told the story and I gave 3 possible solutions. So one solution to, you know, somebody stealing your soda and you catching them, you could cuss them out. Absolutely, that's a choice that a lot of people would do. It may not be the right decision, but it's a choice. Another choice, another possible solution is you could be, you know, you could just let them have it and not, you know, deal with them or talk to them about it. You could let them have the soda, and that's kind of a passive, you know, response, but it's another choice. And then my third solution, as I go down the column and I look at the bottom, you know, a third possible solution is that, you know, I be assertive and I talk to them about it and I let them know, you know, what I expect them to do in order to make it right. And once I do this, then I can start looking at my pros and cons of each of the possible choices. So as I look at, you know, what might happen if I cuss them out, and I start thinking about, you know, what are the positives of this? Well, one of the positives of, you know, cussing them out is that they might not do it again, right? Maybe you intimidate them and they apologize and they freak out and, no, you know, don't freak out on me, and maybe they don't steal from you anymore. Another possible solution, or another pro, sorry, is that you get to get your anger out, you know, and in the short term, it feels pretty good to let your anger out on somebody who you have those difficult feelings for, who's been stealing from you. And so those are the 2, you know, main pros of, you know, cussing them out. But as we move our way across and look at this solution, we start looking at, you know, what are some of the cons that might happen if you cuss that person out. So, you know, if you're cussing out a coworker in the workplace, you might get into trouble. You could get in a fight. You might, you know, get a bad reputation as somebody with anger management problems, and, you know, that's kind of embarrassing. So you might embarrass yourself. And so, you know, as we look at this, the cons of cussing them out really do, you know, in this case, sort of outweigh the pros. And so then we start looking at the pros and cons of the next one. You know, maybe you let them have your soda because, you know what, it's just a soda, it's not a big deal. And so when we look at the pros of that, you know, maybe one of the pros of, you know, just letting them have the soda is that there is no conflict, right? You get to avoid the situation, you get to avoid the conflict. You know, maybe you just kind of sweep it under the table, and maybe, you know, if they know that you don't care, you know, that they have your soda, then maybe you make a friend out of the deal. And those are some possible pros. I don't know how likely that is, but, you know, is it possible that a good thing might happen out of it? Absolutely. But as we look at the cons, you know, as we look at the cons of just letting someone steal from you, there's a couple of really major cons here. For one, if someone gets away with stealing from you, they might steal from you in the future, right? They might do it again. And to take it a step further, if other people know that, you know, someone was stealing from you and they got away with it, then other people might start stealing from you as well. And also, you know, I didn't write this one down, but you also might get a reputation as just being soft, you know, someone that other people could steal from. And so as we look at this, this has 2 pros and 2 cons, so it kind of balances out. Is it really necessarily a bad decision? No. But is it really the best solution or the best decision? Probably not that either. So as we go down to the bottom and we look at our last possible solution, it says be assertive, right? Tell them how you feel and what you expect. You say, look, I feel frustrated when you steal my stuff. If you don't, you know, replace it, I'm going to have to tell somebody. I'm going to have to do something. And we look at the pros of that. And so, you know, one of the pros is that that person might respect you for, you know, being assertive and not telling on them. You might get another soda out of the deal. You might make a friend. There are lots of possible solutions. You know, and one of the other ones that I didn't write down is maybe one of the things that you gain is you gain respect for yourself, right? So you're not letting somebody take advantage of you, but you're staying in control. And so there's a big long list of pros here. And as we look at the cons, really, there's only one real con to the situation. It is that you have to deal with the conflict, and that person might get upset. But because you have talked about your feelings and because you have set good boundaries, the chances of there being any other, backlash or any other problem related to this are relatively small. And so as we look at, how is it that I would want to respond if someone has stolen my soda, we see that, being assertive really is our best option, and it comes down to simple math. If you think of each pro as a plus and each con as a minus, in the first one there's 2 pros and 3 minuses, that's -1. It's obviously a bad decision. The middle one, there's 2 pros and 2 cons, so it kind of evens itself out. But in our third choice, right, our third solution, there are 3 positives to that and really only 1 major con that I can see. So obviously that's a positive solution, and it is our best choice. The other thing that I absolutely have to talk about in decision making is the difference between short-term and long-term goals, short-term and long-term consequences. And the reason why is that I have to bring this up is that many times in our life, the easy thing to do in the short term has very serious long-term consequences, and we don't always think about those. We have a tendency to think that, things that are in the short term are more important than things that happen in the long term. So the first thing that I want to do is just kind of tell you how I feel about, what those terms mean. So in a short-term solution or a short-term answer to a problem, is something that is going to happen, immediately in the next few days, maybe the next couple weeks, something that is going to happen sometime soon. And then for long term, it's something that's going to take a little bit longer, the next month, the next couple months, maybe into years and even further. And to illustrate this point, I want you to think for a minute about every morning, every single morning when you wake up. You have a decision to make. You have a decision to make about whether or not you're going to go to school, whether or not you're going to go to work. In the short term, you may not want to do your homework. But when you start to think about this in the long term, what are the long-term consequences of not doing your work? What are the long-term consequences of, not going to work? What are the long-term consequences of not going to school? And so, for those of you who are watching this video and doing this assignment, obviously you've made a good decision here. In the short term, did you want to do it? Probably not. Did you want to listen to me for 20 plus minutes and then have to, turn in an assignment? Probably not. But in the long term, by doing that, by making that decision, you have given yourself the opportunity to graduate from high school, maybe go on to college, those sorts of things. If you wake up on a morning and you don't necessarily feel great, you just don't feel like doing it, you don't want to go to school, you don't want to go to work, in the short term, it's pretty easy to turn off that alarm clock and just blow the day off. But the long-term consequences of that can be pretty serious. Maybe you fail a class, maybe, you've missed work before and you get, yourself in trouble. And this also applies in, dealing with our anger and our difficult situations, because in the short term, it might be really, really tempting to, lash out at an angry customer who's mistreated you, or, to get into it with a coworker, cuss them out, or who knows what. But the long-term consequences of that are pretty serious. And so as we think about, solving our problems and making decisions, you always want to weigh, is what I want in the short term going to outweigh, thinking about those balance scales, is that going to outweigh the consequences that I have to deal with in the long run? And so thinking about decision making, there's a lot really here to unpack, and obviously it's more than I can fit into, a 20-minute video, but I do strongly encourage you to think about the choices that you make. Maybe think about the choices that you've made in the past. What did you do that was a good choice that really helped you in the long run? What did you maybe do that hurt you? in the short run. When have you had to pay the price for bad decisions that were based maybe more on short-term goals than long-term consequences? And so I will tell you that is going to do it for this video for today. Thanks again to everybody for showing up. I sure do appreciate you guys. And that's gonna wrap this video up. I will tell you that when I come back next time, I'm gonna do the big picture overview. We're gonna look at all the different things that we have learned throughout the course of these 2 semesters. And so I hope that everybody has a great day. Bye-bye.